The heavy scent of roses filled the banquet hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors, casting a dazzling glow over the hundreds of guests gathered to celebrate the engagement of Cassandra Sinclair and Nicholas Blackwood. Cassandra stood in the center of it all, a vision of elegance in her ivory gown, her delicate fingers wrapped around a champagne flute. Tonight was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. But beneath the layers of silk and diamonds, her heart clenched in unease. She glanced at Nicholas, the man she had loved since she was 18. His dark eyes glowed with confidence, his tailored suit molding his frame to perfection. He played the part of the devoted fiancé so well. Too well. Cassandra knew something was wrong. The lingering glances between Nicholas and her best friend, Liliana Monroe, were subtle but unmistakable. Liliana had been her confidante, her sister in all but blood. Yet deep down Cassandra had always suspected the truth. As the music swelled and guests raised their glasses in a toast, Nicholas leaned in and pressed a kiss to her temple. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his lips curving in a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. A chill ran down her spine. "Excuse me," she said softly, slipping away from the crowd. Her hands trembled as she walked through the dimly lit corridors of the grand estate. A whisper of laughter caught her attention and she followed the sound, heart-pounding, breath-shallow, until she reached the library. The door was ajar. She stepped closer, peering through the gap, and her world shattered in an instant. There, tangled in the golden glow of candlelight, was Nicholas. His hands were on Liliana's waist, his lips moving over hers with a passion Cassandra had thought was reserved for her alone. Her breath caught in her throat, but the agony truly set in when Liliana spoke. "She has no idea, does she?" Liliana's voice dripped with amusement. Nicholas chuckled, his fingers trailing along Liliana's cheek. "Why would she? Cassandra is naive. She believes in fairy tales." The words sliced through her like a blade. The love of her life. The best friend she had trusted. Together. Laughing at her. Rage boiled beneath her skin, but her body felt frozen in place. Her pulse roared in her ears. Every promise, every whispered, "I love you," every dream of the future, they had all been lies. Then, as if sensing her presence, Nicholas turned. His eyes widened. "Cassandra." She didn't wait to hear his excuses. With a strangled gasp, she turned and fled, her heels clicking against the floor as she ran blindly through the corridors. But fate had one final cruelty in store for her. As she rushed down the grand staircase, blinded by tears, a sudden force slammed into her back. Pain. She tumbled forward, her vision blurring as she felt herself falling. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Nicholas and Liliana standing at the top of the stairs, watching. Firking. A sharp gasp tore from Cassandra's lips as she bolted upright. Her chest heaved, her skin damp with sweat. She clutched the sheets beneath her, her fingers twisting into the soft fabric. The scent of lavender filled her senses, familiar yet foreign. Where was she? Slowly she turned her head. Sunlight streamed through sheer curtains, illuminating a grand bedroom decorated in shades of ivory and gold. Her heart pounded as she recognized the intricate floral designs on the wallpaper, the antique vanity by the window. This was her childhood room. Panic clawed at her throat. This couldn't be real. Her hands trembled as she reached for the mirror on the nightstand. The reflection staring back at her sent a jolt of shock through her veins. She wasn't the woman who had fallen to her death. She was younger. Her fingers traced her face, her skin smooth, untouched by time. No engagement ring on her finger. No scars from the betrayal she had suffered. Then it hit her. She had died. Nicholas and Liliana had killed her. Yet here she was, alive. And in the past. A slow, chilling smile spread across her lips. Fate had given her a second chance. She wouldn't waste it. This time she wouldn't be the naive girl who believed in love and loyalty. This time she would control her fate. And when the moment was right, she would make them both pay. Cassandra sat at the edge of her bed, her mind spinning. The realization settled over her like a storm cloud. She had been reborn. Given another chance. But this time she wasn't going to be the naive, trusting woman she had once been. This time she would control everything. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening into fists. She needed a plan. If she played her cards right, she could rewrite her fate and ensure that Nicholas and Liliana suffered the way they had made her suffer. Cassandra swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood, taking in every detail of her surroundings. The grand bedroom was exactly as she remembered it when she was 19. That meant she had been brought back to the year before she met Nicholas. Her heart pounded. This was perfect. She had time to prepare. Her eyes darted to the vanity mirror. Slowly she approached it, her gaze locking onto her own reflection. The young woman staring back at her had none of the scars, none of the pain. But she wasn't innocent anymore. Not after what she had been through. She smirked. Now she had knowledge. And knowledge was power. Cassandra needed to confirm a few things. If this truly was the past, then her father, Victor Sinclair, was still alive. And that meant she still had her family's wealth, their influence. She turned toward the door, her mind racing. If she played the game right, Nicholas would never even see her coming. Cassandra found her father in his study, exactly where she expected him to be. Victor Sinclair was a powerful man, a businessman feared by many. He was ruthless, but he had always loved her. "Cassandra?" he said, setting down his whiskey glass as she stepped into the room. His dark eyes studied her with curiosity. "You're up early." She smiled softly, stepping forward. "I needed to talk to you, father." His brow furrowed. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I want to learn the family business." Victor's expression shifted into one of surprise. "The girl who once told me she wanted nothing to do with boardrooms and stock markets." Cassandra smiled. "I've changed my mind." He saw the way her father studied her, assessing. Then slowly he smirked. "Good. It's about time." Cassandra's heart pounded in satisfaction. In her past life she had been kept away from the business, coddled like a fragile princess. That had made her vulnerable. Not this time. This time she would be powerful enough that no one could ever betray her again. For the next few months, Cassandra immersed herself in the Sinclair empire. She learned everything: stocks, negotiations, corporate takeovers. She was relentless. The men in the boardroom underestimated her at first, but she used that to her advantage. With her father's guidance, she gained their respect. And soon she began making moves of her own. She started quietly investing in companies tied to the Blackwood family. Nicholas's family had always been ambitious, hungry for power. But their greed was their weakness. Cassandra would use that against them. But Nicholas wasn't her only concern. There was still Liliana. Liliana Monroe had been her closest friend. The woman she had trusted more than anyone. And yet she had been the one holding Nicholas in her arms that night. Cassandra's fingers clenched around her glass of wine as she studied the guest list for an upcoming charity gala. Liliana would be there. Perfect. The night of the gala arrived, and Cassandra made sure she was the center of attention. She wore a blood-red gown, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. Confidence radiated from her with every step she took. The whispers began the moment she entered the room. "She's changed. She looks dangerous." Good. She wanted them to fear her. Then she saw her. Liliana stood near the champagne fountain, laughing, oblivious. She hadn't changed at all. Still beautiful, still cunning. But now Cassandra knew the truth. She approached slowly, a small smile curving her lips. Liliana turned at the last moment, her eyes widening in surprise. "Cassandra." Cassandra tilted her head. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Liliana smiled, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. "Yes. You look different." Cassandra sipped her champagne. "Do I?" Liliana chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, I suppose we're all growing up, aren't we?" Cassandra's eyes gleamed. "Yes. And with growth comes clarity." Liliana's smile faltered. "Good. Cassandra wasn't going to expose her just yet. No, she would wait. She would let Liliana believe she was safe, let her guard drop. And then when the time was right, she would ruin her. Cassandra spent the next few weeks weaving her web. She was careful, calculated. She made sure Liliana felt comfortable, rekindling their friendship with just the right amount of warmth and distance. Liliana, foolish as ever, never suspected a thing. Then came Nicholas. Cassandra knew he would enter her orbit soon. After all, he was ambitious. And the Sinclair family's power was something he wouldn't be able to resist. And just as she predicted, it wasn't long before she crossed paths with him at a business gala. Nicholas Blackwood was as charming as ever, his smile calculated, his presence commanding. Women still fawned over him, still fell for his perfect act. But Cassandra saw him for what he was. A snake. Cassandra Sinclair. He greeted smoothly, holding out a hand. It's been too long. She took his hand, letting her fingers linger just enough to keep him intrigued. Nicholas Blackwood. I didn't expect to see you here. He smirked. I go where opportunity calls. Cassandra smiled. So do I. Nicholas's gaze darkened with interest. He didn't remember her, of course. In this timeline they had never met before. But that was exactly what she wanted. He had the upper hand now. And she would use it to destroy him. Cassandra sat in her father's office, the glow of the city skyline illuminating the room through the vast glass windows. A storm brewed within her, dark and calculated. Her fingers traced the rim of her whiskey glass as she stared down at the reports spread across the mahogany desk. Nicholas Blackwood had begun making moves. His family's company, Blackwood Enterprises, had started acquiring smaller firms, positioning themselves as major contenders in the business world. But Cassandra knew the truth. They were overextending. Nicholas was bold, but he was reckless. His hunger for power blinded him just as it had in the past. She would use that. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she said, her voice smooth. The door creaked open and her father stepped inside. Victor Sinclair was a man of immense power, his presence commanding respect. He had been one of the few men Nicholas had feared in her past life. I heard you've been meeting with the Blackwood boy, Victor said, his sharp eyes studying her. Cassandra smiled, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. Just business, father. Victor chuckled, sinking into the chair across from her. Business? I know that look in your eyes. What are you planning? She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. Nicholas Blackwood is ambitious, but he's walking into a trap of his own making. He's buying companies he can't sustain. If we wait, he'll be desperate. Her father smirked. And when he is? She took a slow sip of her drink, savoring the burn. We strike. Victor let out a deep laugh. You've grown ruthless. She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. I've learned from the best. Her father nodded approvingly. Just be careful. A man like Blackwood doesn't like losing. Cassandra's lips curled into a smirk. Neither did she. The following week, Cassandra orchestrated her next step. She arranged a private meeting with Nicholas at a high-end restaurant, one frequented by the city's elite. Nicholas arrived exactly on time, dressed in a sharp navy suit. He exuded confidence, flashing that infamous smirk of his as he slid into the seat across from her. I must say I was surprised to receive your invitation, he said smoothly, signaling the waiter for a drink. The Sinclairs and the Blackwoods have never exactly been allies. Cassandra rested her chin on her hand, gazing at him through thick lashes. Perhaps it's time we change that. Nicholas arched a brow, intrigued. Oh. And why would a woman as powerful as you need me? She tilted her head slightly, studying him. The question is, why would a man as ambitious as you turn down an opportunity to work with the Sinclairs? His smirk deepened. You're playing a dangerous game, Cassandra. She leaned in, letting her voice drop to a whisper. I don't play games, Nicholas. I win them. For the first time she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Admiration? Curiosity? Either way, she had him exactly where she wanted. As the evening progressed, they discussed business, potential partnerships, investment opportunities. Cassandra knew Nicholas would bite. He was arrogant, believing he could manipulate anyone to his advantage. But this time the game was hers. Over the next few weeks, Cassandra positioned herself closer to Nicholas. She knew his weaknesses, his pride, his greed, his insatiable hunger for power. She fed his ego, played the part of the brilliant yet slightly intrigued businesswoman. She let him think he was charming her, let him believe he was in control. But in the shadows she was tightening her grip on his world. Her investments in Blackwood Enterprises were strategic. She bought shares discreetly, ensuring that when the time came she would hold enough power to shake his foundation. She also kept a close eye on Liliana. Liliana Monroe still basked in the attention of high society, her beauty and charm winning over even the most skeptical of hearts. But Cassandra saw through her facade. Liliana had not yet started her affair with Nicholas. But she would. Cassandra would make sure of it. One evening, Cassandra arranged a lavish party at her family's estate. The guest list was exclusive, filled with the city's most influential figures. And both Nicholas and Liliana were invited. The night was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Cassandra played the perfect hostess, effortlessly weaving through the crowd, charming everyone in her path. Then she saw them. Nicholas and Liliana. They were standing at the edge of the ballroom, engaged in what seemed like an innocent conversation. But Cassandra knew better. She approached, her steps slow and deliberate. "Nicholas," she purred, placing a hand on his arm. "Enjoying the party?" Nicholas turned, his smirk returning instantly. "You certainly know how to throw an event, Cassandra." Liliana's smile was polite, but there was something in her eyes, analyzing, calculating. "Perfect." Cassandra turned to Liliana. "You look lovely tonight." Liliana chuckled softly. "And you as always look stunning." Cassandra smiled, leaning in slightly. "You should dance with Nicholas. He's quite the dancer." Liliana blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, Nicholas grinned, extending a hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Liliana hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. Cassandra stepped back, watching as they moved to the dance floor. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. The seed had been planted. She just had to wait for it to grow. As weeks passed, Cassandra continued to maneuver carefully, playing her role to perfection. She subtly encouraged Liliana and Nicholas's interactions, ensuring they spent more time together. She watched as the stolen glances turned into lingering touches. She saw the hesitation in Liliana's eyes, the way her guilt battled with desire. And she saw Nicholas's ego swell, his confidence growing as he believed he could have both the powerful Sinclair heiress and her best friend. But Cassandra knew exactly how this would end. Because she had already lived it. One evening, Cassandra set the final stage for her trap. She invited Nicholas to her penthouse for an exclusive business discussion, just the two of them. He arrived, confident as always. But this time Cassandra had arranged for Liliana to be there as well. She timed it perfectly. Just as Nicholas leaned in, thinking he was about to claim a victory, Liliana walked in. The room fell into silence. Liliana's eyes widened, shock and hurt flashing across her face. Cassandra turned, feigning innocence. "Oh, Liliana. I didn't realize you'd be here." Nicholas stiffened, sensing the shift. "This isn't what it looks like." Liliana's gaze flickered between them, doubt creeping in. Cassandra tilted her head. "Isn't it?" She let the silence stretch, watching as insecurity began to take root in Liliana's mind. She knew what would happen next. Liliana would start questioning. She would wonder if Nicholas had already betrayed her. And that doubt would be the beginning of the end. Nicholas and Liliana were about to destroy each other. And Cassandra would be there to watch it all burn. Cassandra sat in her penthouse, the city lights flickering against the glass walls. A quiet smirk curled at the edges of her lips as she swirled the wine in her glass. The night had gone exactly as she planned. Liliana had left Nicholas standing there, her face etched with betrayal and confusion. Nicholas, in turn, had looked furious. His carefully constructed world had been shaken, but he had no idea that it was Cassandra who had planted the seeds of destruction. She leaned back against the plush leather of her armchair, savoring the moment. Nicholas and Liliana were walking right into her web. And soon the chaos would begin. Liliana paced in her apartment, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her phone. Nicholas had called twice already and she had ignored both. Her heart pounded as she recalled the way he had been standing so close to Cassandra, the way Cassandra had looked at her with that knowing smile. Was she overreacting? Nicholas had assured her before, there was nothing going on between him and Cassandra. But tonight had planted a seed of doubt. Was he lying? Liliana pressed her lips together, debating whether to call him back. Then a message popped up on her phone. Cassandra, I hope you're okay. I didn't mean for you to see that. Liliana's stomach twisted. The words were simple but the implication was clear. Cassandra was making her question everything. And it was working. Nicholas slammed his glass onto the bar counter, his jaw clenched. This wasn't supposed to happen. Liliana had left him standing there like a fool, and now she wasn't answering his calls. He hated this, hated the feeling of losing control. Cassandra. His mind flashed back to her expression, the way she had looked so satisfied. Was she playing a game? Nicholas had underestimated women before, but Cassandra Sinclair wasn't just any woman. She was sharp, calculating, dangerous, and that made him want her even more. The next day, Cassandra sent out an invitation for an exclusive event, one that was too prestigious for either Nicholas or Liliana to ignore. A charity gala held at one of the Sinclair properties. Nicholas, of course, would come. He couldn't resist an opportunity to showcase his power. Liliana, on the other hand, would come because of curiosity and jealousy. And that was exactly what Cassandra wanted. The night of the gala was a masterpiece. The venue was dripping in elegance, golden chandeliers, a live orchestra playing soft melodies, champagne flowing endlessly. Cassandra arrived in a gown that made heads turn, deep sapphire, her shoulders bare, her hair falling in perfect waves. Every inch of her screamed confidence and control. She wanted to make sure both Nicholas and Liliana knew that she was untouchable. She moved through the crowd, greeting guests, charming investors, always keeping an eye on the entrance. Then Nicholas arrived. Dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, he walked in like he owned the place. His eyes locked onto hers instantly, a slow smirk curling his lips. But before he could approach, Liliana entered. And Cassandra saw it, the hesitation in Liliana's steps, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was beginning to lose trust in Nicholas. Perfect. Cassandra made her move. She walked straight up to Nicholas, placing a hand lightly on his arm. I'm glad you made it. Nicholas arched a brow. Wouldn't miss it for the world. His voice was smooth, but Cassandra could see Liliana watching them from across the room. Good. Cassandra leaned in just enough to make it look intimate. We should talk later. Privately. Nicholas's smirk deepened. I'd like that. And just like that, Liliana turned away, her jaw tight. The cracks in their relationship were spreading. Cassandra continued her silent war. She danced with Nicholas, letting his hands linger just a little too long. She laughed at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke. She knew Liliana was watching. And the moment she saw Liliana slip away to the terrace, Cassandra followed. Liliana stood by the balcony, her hands gripping the railing. Are you okay? Cassandra asked softly. Liliana turned, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. I don't know what's going on between you and Nicholas, but Cassandra sighed. Liliana, if you have to question it, isn't that already an answer? Liliana's breath hitched. Cassandra placed a comforting hand on her arm. I would never intentionally hurt you, but maybe it's time to open your eyes. Liliana swallowed hard, her mind spinning. And just like that, Cassandra knew she had won. Nicholas sensed the shift immediately. Liliana became distant. She started questioning his every move, scrutinizing his interactions with Cassandra. She stopped calling him as often, stopped looking at him the same way. And Cassandra? She played the role of the innocent bystander, always there to offer Nicholas a drink, a smile, a distraction. Nicholas was losing control. And he hated it. It all came to a head at yet another lavish gathering. This time Liliana was done watching from the sidelines. She cornered Nicholas in front of everyone. "I saw the way you look at her," Liliana hissed, her voice laced with betrayal. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Nicholas scoffed, feigning innocence. "You're overreacting." Liliana's eyes blazed. "Am I? Because it sure seems like you've already made your choice." The room fell silent. Cassandra stood nearby, watching with satisfaction as the pieces fell exactly where she had placed them. Liliana turned, her gaze locking onto Cassandra. "You played me, didn't you?" Cassandra merely smiled. "I only revealed what was already there." Liliana's face twisted in anger, but deep down she knew it was true. Nicholas had never truly been hers. And now he had nothing. Nicholas Blackwood was a man who thrived on control. But as the days passed, he realized he was losing everything. His relationship with Liliana was in shambles. His business was under pressure, with Sinclair Enterprises making strategic moves that threatened his own company's expansion. And Cassandra? She remained untouchable, always one step ahead, always smiling. And for the first time Nicholas Blackwood felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Cassandra had turned his own game against him. And she wasn't done yet. Cassandra stood before the vast floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse. The city sprawled beneath her like a kingdom she was destined to rule. The pieces were in place. The game she had so carefully orchestrated was reaching its climax. Nicholas Blackwood had lost Liliana. His once flawless reputation was cracking. His company was on the verge of financial ruin, thanks to Sinclair Enterprises strategically cornering the market. And now it was time for her final move. She took a slow sip of her wine, savoring the moment. Tonight, Nicholas would realize the truth: he was never the predator. He had always been the prey. Nicholas stormed into his office, rage coursing through his veins. "Where the hell is the report?" he barked at his assistant. The young man flinched. "Sir, we're still waiting for—" "I don't have time for excuses," Nicholas snapped. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Sinclair Enterprises had launched an aggressive takeover of several companies his family had been targeting. Cassandra had been quiet, too quiet, which meant she was planning something even worse. And Liliana. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks. Nicholas had built his life on control over his business, his relationships, his enemies. But now everything was slipping. And it all led back to one person. Cassandra Sinclair. A black envelope arrived at Nicholas's office later that evening. No sender. No markings. Just a single elegant card inside. "Join me for one last dance. Midnight. Sinclair Tower." Nicholas stared at the message, his jaw tightening. Cassandra. He should ignore it. He should walk away. But he couldn't. Not when he knew she held the answers to everything. Not when she was the one who had brought him to his knees. With a deep breath, he crushed the note in his fist. Fine. If Cassandra wanted a final confrontation, she would get one. Nicholas arrived at Sinclair Tower just before midnight. The building was eerily quiet, the usual hustle of employees replaced by an unsettling stillness. The only sound was the clicking of his shoes against the polished marble floor as he entered the penthouse. And there she was. Cassandra Sinclair, standing in the center of the room, dressed in a sleek black gown, a glass of champagne in her hand. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. "Nicholas. I was starting to think you wouldn't come." Nicholas clenched his jaw. "You've been playing me this entire time, haven't you?" Cassandra took a slow step forward. "I didn't have to play you, Nicholas. You destroyed yourself." His fists tightened at his sides. "You think you've won?" She tilted her head, her smile chilling. "I don't think, Nicholas. I know." She walked past him, her perfume lingering in the air. Your company is in shambles. Your reputation is ruined. Liliana has left you. And soon. You'll have nothing. Nicholas let out a bitter laugh. And what do you get out of this, Cassandra? Revenge. She turned to him, her eyes flashing. Justice. For the first time Nicholas saw it. This wasn't about power. It wasn't about money. It was personal. What did I do to you? He whispered, his voice raw. Cassandra's gaze darkened. You killed me. Nicholas's breath caught. What? Cassandra stepped closer, her voice a whisper. You and Liliana pushed me down those stairs, Nicholas. You laughed as I died. He took a step back, confusion flickering across his face. That's impossible. Cassandra smirked. Is it? Nicholas's mind reeled. He had no memory of this. No recollection of ever harming her. And yet the certainty in her eyes sent a chill through his bones. You can't be serious, he muttered. You sound insane. Cassandra let out a soft laugh. That's the thing, Nicholas. You don't have to believe me. You just have to suffer the consequences. She turned away, her voice light. By morning, Sinclair Enterprises will own Blackwood Enterprises. You'll be left with nothing. Nicholas's hands clenched into fists. You think I'll just let you win? Cassandra's smile was sharp as a blade. You don't have a choice. Nicholas surged forward, grabbing her arm. I won't let you destroy me. Cassandra didn't flinch. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. You already did that to yourself. She pulled away, her gaze cold. Now get out of my sight. Nicholas stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. For the first time in his life he had lost. Completely. And Cassandra. Cassandra had won. As Nicholas stumbled out of Sinclair Tower, Cassandra poured herself another drink. The war was over. Her enemies were defeated. She had rewritten her fate. This time no one controlled her. This time she controlled everything. And she had never felt more alive. Cassandra stood at the pinnacle of her empire, gazing out at the city that had once felt like a prison. The towering skyline reflected back at her through the penthouse windows. But tonight, for the first time, she wasn't looking at a battlefield. She was looking at her kingdom. Nicholas Blackwood was finished. His company had been absorbed into Sinclair Enterprises overnight, and by morning, the news would break that the Blackwood dynasty had crumbled. The media would feast on the scandal, dissecting every decision that had led to his fall. Liliana Monroe had vanished from social circles, her reputation in ruins after leaked emails exposed her numerous betrayals, not just against Cassandra, but against many of her so-called friends. The elite of the city had turned on her, and now she was nothing more than a fading memory. Cassandra had done what she set out to do. She had rewritten her fate. She had won. But why didn't it feel as satisfying as she had imagined? The next morning the headlines were merciless. Blackwood Empire collapses. Sinclair Enterprises takes over. Scandal erupts. Liliana Monroe's betrayals exposed. Cassandra Sinclair, the most powerful woman in the city? Cassandra read each article with detached amusement, sipping her coffee as the world celebrated her triumph. Her name was everywhere. Her influence was unquestionable. But as she scrolled through the news, a familiar emptiness crept in. She had been fueled by revenge for so long that she hadn't stopped to ask herself, what came next? What did a queen do once her enemies were gone? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She expected one of her assistants, perhaps her father, but when she opened it she found a broken man standing before her. Nicholas Blackwood. Nicholas looked nothing like the arrogant businessman he had once been. His suit was disheveled, his tie loose around his neck. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, were hollow, defeated. Cassandra arched a brow. I wasn't expecting you to have the nerve to show up. Nicholas let out a bitter laugh. What else do I have to lose? She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. Let's see what kind of last-ditch effort you have up your sleeve. Nicholas walked inside, his movements slow as if the weight of his downfall was pressing down on him. He turned to her, his gaze heavy. You won, Cassandra, he said quietly. I have nothing left. Cassandra crossed her arms. You sound like you expect me to feel guilty. I don't, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I need to know. Know what? She asked. Nicholas swallowed hard. How did you do it? She tilted her head, a small smirk playing on her lips. Do you mean how did I take away everything you ever wanted? Or do you mean how I survived the death you sentenced me to? Nicholas's jaw clenched. I don't remember hurting you, Cassandra. I don't remember. She stepped closer, her eyes burning into his. You wouldn't. Because in your past life I was just a pawn in your game. You used me. You betrayed me. And when I was no longer useful, you threw me away. Nicholas held her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. But this time you did the same thing to me. Cassandra didn't flinch. Yes. And unlike you, I don't regret it. He let out a bitter chuckle. I suppose I deserved that. She studied him, searching for the arrogance that had once defined him, but it was gone. In its place was something different. Something human. It unsettled her. She had always imagined seeing Nicholas on his knees, begging for mercy. But now that it had happened, it wasn't as gratifying as she thought it would be. She had broken him. And yet she felt no satisfaction. Just an aching hollowness. As Nicholas stood there, defeated, Cassandra realized something. She had spent so long chasing revenge, crafting a life that revolved around taking everything from him. But now that she had what was left, would she spend the rest of her life proving she could destroy anyone who crossed her? Would she rule through fear alone? Was that who she wanted to be? Nicholas took a slow breath. What happens now? Cassandra hesitated. She could ruin him completely, ensure he never recovered. Or she could let him go. The old Cassandra, the woman who had loved Nicholas with all her heart, would have forgiven him. The new Cassandra, the woman who had clawed her way back to power, wasn't sure if she was capable of forgiveness. But she knew one thing. She was done letting Nicholas Blackwood dictate her life. She exhaled slowly, then turned away. You walk away, Nicholas. You leave this city and you never try to rebuild what you lost. Nicholas frowned. And if I do? Cassandra's lips curled into a cold smile. Then I'll destroy you all over again. For a moment he just stood there as if trying to understand the woman she had become. Then with a nod he turned and walked toward the door. He paused before leaving, his voice quiet. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. Cassandra didn't respond. She didn't need his apologies. She needed to move forward. And as the door closed behind Nicholas Blackwood, she knew she had made her final move. The game was over. Days turned into weeks, and Cassandra found herself standing at the top of Sinclair Enterprises, overlooking everything she had built. He had power, influence, control. And yet for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond revenge. She had spent so much of her second chance destroying her enemies. But now it was time to build something new. Something entirely her own. With a slow, satisfied smile, she turned away from the skyline and walked back into her office. The past was buried. The future was hers. And this time she would create a life that no one could take from her. She was no longer a pawn. She was the queen. And the world would remember her name.